Hello students, in continuing from where we left off, we'll be discussing in greater details the four types of unemployment that we tend to find within the macroeconomy. The first being frictional unemployment. And basically, frictional unemployment is caused by the time required to bring together labor suppliers and labor demanders. Because invariably what you find is that when an employer is looking for a person to fill a particular post, he or she doesn't hire the first person who applies for the job. And vice versa, when a person is looking for a job, he or she would not necessarily take the first job that they get. So basically what you have are cases whereby the employer is trying to get the best fit in terms of the person to fill the job, and vice versa, you as a prospective person within the labor force, you are looking to make sure that you get the best fit for your skills that you may have. So he says here that in terms of the second sub-bullet, that employers, they basically need time to learn about the talents that's available, and likewise job seekers, they need time to learn about employment opportunities, because at the end of the day you want to make sure that you get the best rewards in terms of whatever skills, experience, qualification that you're bringing to the job market. So generally what you find is that within the macroeconomy we are less concerned about frictional unemployment because it tends to be voluntary. It's not to say that the person who is seeking the job can't find any, and vice versa. Is not to say that the employer, the prospective employer, can't find someone to fill the job. It's the case where mixing and matching come into play, whereby both parts of the labor force, they're trying to make sure they get the optimum fit. The next one speaks to what's called seasonal unemployment, and it's one of those unemployment factors that we tend to find more so within our parts of the Caribbean, where, for instance, you have a lot of tourism. With tourism being the mainstay of many of the economies, they tend to find themselves being exposed to seasonal unemployment. So what you realize from the first bullet, it says that seasonal unemployment is caused by seasonal changes in labor demand during the year. So if you were to take it beyond just tourism, for instance, you note that in some cases, many small stores within Antigua, for instance, they employ more labor, let's say during the Christmas season or some other form of festive season. So what it says is that to eliminate the impact of such changes, we tend to season or adjust monthly employment statistics for these factors, because we know that they're going to take place. It's not to say that there are any fundamental deficiencies within the macroeconomy, but just because of the way your products or services are actually demanded, you'll expect to see some seasonal changes from one time period to the next. The next one speaks to structural unemployment. And what he's saying to you is that structural unemployment will more or less come about due to changes within the macroeconomy. And he says here that it exists because unemployed workers often do not have the skills demanded by employees, or they do not live where the skills are in demand. So as the economy experiences these structural changes, persons are going to find themselves being unemployed in the short term. However, in the longer term, this is expected to more or less cancel itself out, because eventually when persons learn where the jobs are, when they learn what skill is required, they're going to obviously either retool themselves or migrate to where these new jobs are. So again, it says here now that structural unemployment basically it occurs because of changes in taste, technology, taxes, or competition reduce the demand for certain skills and increase the demand for others. Of the four types of unemployment, one of the most critically important one for us as macroeconomists is that of cyclical unemployment. And what he's saying to you is that cyclical unemployment basically comes about from the fact that in the normal business cycle, you're going to have ups and downs. The economy is expected to operate within what's called business cycles. So what you're going to find is that with that business cycle, if you have economic contraction, resources are not fully being utilized, that is going to generate some form of unemployment. Vice versa, if you have cases whereby resources are fully utilized, then with the economy growing, the demand for goods and services that's increasing, you expect then that unemployment should decrease. So if we were to look at our production possibility frontier, you'll note, for instance, 2 points being colored red. Points X and point Y. So point X is that point that we'll find when we're going to have some form of cyclical unemployment, because it means then that the economy is performing less than its optimum. Remember when we discussed that production possibility frontier, we were saying that any point along that arc represents an efficient use of resources. Alright, so point X will represent cases whereby the economy is not producing as its optimum, like in a recession, it is going to create unemployment. On the other hand, point Y is a point that represents economic growth over time, which is what we seek to achieve. If that's possible, then obviously with more jobs, the unemployment rate is expected to decline. So if you note again from the last sub-bullet, it says that with cyclical unemployment, it means then that the economy is operating within the left side of its production possibility frontier. The next slide just basically gives you a feel dating back to 2009 as to some of the cyclical unemployment that we had taking place during the heart of the global recession. How do we then address cyclical unemployment within the macroeconomy? Because you may recall that I would have said that cyclical unemployment is one of those that we really have to pay particular attention to as policy makers, because that really speaks to the health of the macroeconomy. So it says here that government policies to stimulate aggregate demand during recessions is aid at basically reducing that type of unemployment. So in the heart of the global recession, we have examples here as to how the US government would have actually intervened to then bring the economy out of that form of unemployment. Question: is there ever going to be zero unemployment? No. In actuality, even when resources are used at its optimum, there is still going to be some level of unemployment. When we use the term full employment within an economy, full employment occurs only if there is no cyclical unemployment. Alright? It occurs only when the only employment is frictional, structural, or seasonal. And again, it does not mean zero unemployment. You're always going to find some level of unemployment. When that takes place, when an economy is said to be operating at its optimum and there is some level of unemployment, we call that the natural rate of unemployment. All right? Okay, so it says here now that in terms of full employment, it says here changes in product demand and technology continue to alter the supply and demand for particular types of labor. Even in a healthy economy, again, there will always be some structural and seasonal unemployment. Alright, so I would have told you before in terms of the yardstick that when we speak about the word full employment, it occurs when, for instance, 4% to 6% of the labor force is unemployed. So that's basically speaking to what I've told you before as the natural rate of unemployment. On on slide 16, we're now going to speak about unemployment compensation. But as you know, for us in small states like Antigua and Barbuda, this is virtually non-existent. It exists more in Europe and other developed economies such as the United States of America. So unemployment compensation basically refers to cash transfers for those who lose their jobs and, of course, again, that caveat, are actively seeking employment. It applies to unemployed workers who meet certain qualifications. Government agencies don't give unemployment benefits infinitum. There's some cap. Because at the end of the day, if it were to run infinitum, these governments would basically find themselves running huge deficits. So unemployment compensation, this tends to last for up to 6 months, and it can be longer in certain cases, provided the individual looks for work. Okay, so what are the various problems with unemployment compensation? Because at the end of the day, what it means is that you're working, yet you're getting some form of financial returns. What are the problems? It says here now that workers who receive benefits tend to search less actively than those who don't. So what he's saying to you is that at the end of the day, because you know you're going to get some form of monetary compensation, you'll be less inclined to get up in the morning and go and look for work. Because at the end of the day, you know that you're still going to get something from the government. It says here also that it may reduce the urgency of finding work, thereby increasing the average duration of unemployment and, of course, the unemployment rate. So everybody understands that. But on the plus side, it says though that it allows for a higher quality job search. So you're going to see now some of the whole concept of frictional unemployment come into play there, where unemployment compensation is concerned, whereby because you're getting some form of financial returns, you basically find yourself picking and choosing to make sure again that when you enter the job market, you get maybe a job which has more stability, as the case may be. Again, we're saying to you that unemployment compensation is not offered in Antigua. In the heart of the global crisis, they were thinking about providing such for persons who were employed in the tourism sector, but that never really materialized itself. In terms of an international comparison, what we do find is that the unemployment rates in the US, on average, relative to what obtains in the US, tend to be very higher. And what are the factors? One of the reasons being that the ratio of unemployment benefits to average pay is higher. So if you're getting more monies again, you'll be less inclined to then go and seek a job. Again, so not only are you getting more, but the next one says here that the unemployment benefits tend to last longer, sometimes years. So obviously, as a worker, you have less incentives to go and find a job. On the other hand, it also says here that government regulations in Europe makes employers reluctant to hire new workers because firing them is difficult. Okay, so you're not hiring. It means then that more persons are actively seeking job. Because you're not hiring, it is increasing the unemployment rate. Okay, so everybody would have understand that. Okay, so what are some of the other factors with the unemployment figures? One, it understates the actual amount of unemployment because they do not include discouraged workers and underemployed. And remember, discouraged workers are those who have stopped looking for work. It's a technical definition. They're really and truly not working. Another problem is that unemployment occurs when people are counted as employed, even if they can find only part-time job. And also, they are vastly qualified for their job. So example, if you have a case where an accountant is working as a clerk, that create underemployment. In countries like Cuba and so forth, I've heard many cases of that. So this is where we're going to end part 2. In part 3 of the lecture, again, we're going to continue with looking at